Hi, thanks for joining the Everything and Anything and a Bit Gay podcast. Today I have a new guest on. Reese from Trauma to Bliss is joining my show. Welcome to the show, Reese.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
Reese, are you in Canada? Is that where you're located?
I am.
Awesome. So Reese is on because Reese has had a journey and is a transgender woman, and we are going to talk about Reese's journey. I also would love to educate some of my listeners who may not be exposed to transgender people. It's not just the LGBTQ plus community that listen to my show. I also have received emails from a straight white guy emailed me a couple of weeks ago saying, "Hey, you don't just have the LGBT plus community listening, so." I just want everyone to feel like comfortable and to be able to ask a question if you feel like, but I want it to if you meet a transgender person, I want it to be a proper question and not some rude question that you have no business asking. So Reese, let's start off with your journey. So when did you realize that you were transgender? Tell us about your story.
Well, fortunately, on my mother's side, I am Indigenous, and I knew from as soon as I can consciously remember back in my childhood that I
Okay.
was always two-spirit. And, in white terms, yes, trans woman. But in my own culture, that there was this fluidity, that there was well, we don't really care about your gender or the clothes that you wear as long as you are a good person.
Awesome. So is that kind of like what? And I've heard of Two Spirit just a couple of years ago, and so tell me about like what the Two Spirit culture is kind of like.
Well, and there's a misappropriation currently widespread in North America that Two Spirit is the umbrella term for anyone that is indigenous and LGBT.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very wrong. It is only the trans people that also are acting in alignment in cultural and spiritual ways that honor our ways of life.
Great first lesson for people to know. So that's really good.
Right.
And so did your family accept whenever you were starting this journey back
Um,
when you were a child?
I mean, I always knew. I was always very fluid in gender. I didn't start my actual journey until early adulthood
Okay.
when, you're out of high school, you're in college, you're living life
Mm-hmm.
and losing your mind.
Yeah.
And I mean, being trans, there's the dysmorphia and the just disconnect from your body and this always feeling of I'm not home in my own skin.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've pieced it together. You've tried everything under the sun. Transitioning is actually the last ditch effort to stay alive, generally.
Okay. Did you have feelings that you didn't want to be alive though at some point? And
Oh, all
and
all the time.
oh, that's so sad.
Being trans, one of the most common, I guess, feelings is suicidal ideation.
And is it because you don't feel like you belong to the world? Is that why? Explain
A
that to
a
me.
feeling of, I mean, first, it's not belonging in your own body on the
Right.
level of this is not my meat suit. It doesn't feel right. And then it's your family, society, friends, this constant pressure that, trans people are supposedly the degenerates of the world.
Mm,
No, trans people have always existed. If you have
mhm.
taken any history or even if you know your basic human biology and the medical science of why trans people exist.
Yeah, and so why do you think that are people just so uneducated? Is that why they just don't like they just have it in their minds that this just came up 10 years ago? Like nobody ever thought about this before. I mean, what do you think is wrong with people? Because I'm still trying to figure that out
Right.
myself for a lot of ways.
See, and yes, I would say a lot of our population, even globally, is uneducated or
Mm,
just maybe not the brightest, but ultimately it's a closed mindedness and
mm.
the unwillingness to type your questions into a Google search bar.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Whenever you started your journey in college or after you graduated from high school, what was your family and your friends' reaction? Were most people accepting of it, or did you have people that are like, "Yeah, nope, I don't want anything to do with you anymore"? or was it a mix?
I mean, I had already been disowned by friends and family for being pansexual.
Mhm,
So, I mean, I had already done the initial drop off of, okay, these people are not for me.
mhm.
But coming out as trans, most people that thought that they were close to me, their response was no, as if they had a say in what was going on inside my body for my life. I went, you don't have to agree. This is just how it is.
So when they say no, like, what do they expect you to be like, "Okay, well, then I'm just gonna forget about this and be what you want me to be?" Is that what they thought?
Exactly. And even community members, like middle-aged gay men at the time. No, you're not trans. Like, have you not seen my existence up until this point? I am very visibly trans.
Yeah, that is shocking to me that I mean, it's not shocking, but I just think it's so ridiculous that people can tell you who you are. They're not you.
Exactly. And especially had they known the years where I was a drag queen, the famous author that speaks about anything and everything.
Mhm,
At no point was their opinion going to shove me back in a closet.
mhm. I wanted to just touch because I think I hear so many sad stories of not just transgender, but, gay and lesbian and non-binary, kids that the suicide rate is so high now. Tell me, it's so sad that they're some of their and it's not just because of their families, it's just because they can't sometimes just deal with the fact that this is who they are and they don't know how to process it. Tell me how you kind of got through that. And I know there's a lot of, suicide hotlines and support that's out there now, but did you use any of those and how did you kind of get through it?
Well, I mean, I never found any of the suicide hotlines helpful because the people that volunteer or work for them are often not actually trained in real world
Mm,
issues.
mhm.
Yes, they have their basic assist training, and that is fantastic as a foundational tool. But
Yeah.
if you lack the hands on experience, which I mean, I personally got to gain when I spent 4 years of my life facilitating peer support groups for trans people of all ages when I was more frontlines in social work.
Okay.
And that was very helpful in my journey because not only did I get to share my own day-to-day lived experiences, it was the handholding of others that were both further along and even beginning their journeys. Because I know people that have transitioned after retirement in their 60s and they
Hmm.
go, but I'm not pretty enough. I'm like, baby, you look great for your age. Shut up.
Yeah. Good for you. So it is, kind of finding somebody that's experiencing or has experienced something that you're going through is probably very helpful, right? So, I mean, I think it's maybe I don't want to compare it, but coming out as gay and to certain people, finding another gay friend or somebody that's gone through it is helpful. Finding somebody in your own community. So, is that kind of what helped you? Is finding somebody in your community?
Definitely. And and even having people that had done all the different options for medical transition, for
Hmm.
surgeries, because it's not no surgery or the full thing. There are several options, and figuring out that is often one of the hardest processes because it's not that you have the surgery and you're done. You have
Yeah.
to, if you go all the way from male to female and go for a full depth vaginoplasty, you have to use a hard dilator for the rest of your life, and it is excruciatingly painful.
Hmm.
That is something that I personally never signed up for.
Hmm.
Was like,
Yeah.
no, that's not an option for me because I'm
Yeah.
not wasting years of my life in extra pain.
Yeah. So tell me about that whenever like how do you kind of go through and think about okay this is I know that I'm transgender and what do you how do you go through and do you talk to doctors and you talk to other people in the community to kind of figure out like what's right for you because you were educated on what you just said that pain is not for you. So how are you going through and making the decision what is right for you? Is that must be a hard process because this is your whole life.
Right. Well, and between doctors, other trans people, and counselors, it was also based on what are your goals? Do you need the ability personally for penetrative vaginal sex? If
Mhm.
that is what you need, then yes, go all the way.
Okay.
If you're if you don't have dysphoria around the phallus and you only want to get rid of the testosterone production in your body so you're not
Mhm.
stuck on a blocker for the rest of your life,
Mhm.
just get rid of the boys. Or if you want the look of a vulva, but you don't need, let's call it fuckability, um, you can also go with a zero depth option where all you can get is like the first digit or two of a finger up there, and you again don't have to worry about dilation, but there are so many options. It all depends on what you as an individual need. And even though doctors are still trying to convince people to be as cis-normative as possible, you
Mhm.
have to do what's right for yourself.
What is the process whenever you decide that you want to do this change? Do you have does so I think in America they make you go through a lot of like psychological treatment and therapy and stuff just to make sure that this is something that you want to do. Is that something that you have to also do like in Canada? And do you suggest
Yes,
that?
we do have very similar, they call it WPATH procedures, and I'm
Okay.
forgetting what the acronym is. But yes, you have to socially live as yourself for a specific period of time. They generally want you already in counseling for at least 2 years.
Hmm.
They want you sober. If you have any addiction in your past, they want you to be 2 years clean.
Okay.
Um, and although there is now on like informed consent, where you can say like, "Hey, this is right for me," they still prefer to follow the old procedures because it prevents and even the starting of hormones. You have to be on hormones for a minimum of, I think it's a year, or at least it was a year when I transitioned, before you can be waitlisted to even consult on surgeries.
Hmm. Wow. What is your thought on whenever a child? Because I think it's great now. So whenever I grew up, being gay, you couldn't even talk about being gay, yet alone trans. So, and I'm older than you, so you just couldn't. That isn't something that back in the '90s you could have talked about really. Especially. And I grew up in Miami in South Florida, and there was no one that was gay in my high school, at least that would admit it. There were gay guys, obviously. I was one of them. I didn't want to admit it to myself because it was so it was just so frowned upon and people would bully you and make fun of you and stuff. And actually, somebody that I graduated with is now a trans woman. And we went, and he was part of my friends group. And we went to dinner with her. I don't know, it was before COVID, and heard her story and heard all the things that she went through, being going from a gay man to realizing that she was a trans woman and kind of going through that journey and stuff. So, and I think whenever I didn't understand transgender until we went to dinner that night, and I understood from somebody that I knew since junior high and high school, the journey that they went through and how difficult it was, and to make that decision and stuff. And it just made me realize this wasn't something that you're like, oh, it'd be cool to be transgender or whatever. Not that I thought that really, but I got it more. I understood it. So,
Right? Well, and with trans kids, I all of us professionals, like I personally work in mental health, in specifically trauma recovery.
mhm,
We discourage all aspects of the medical transition for as long as possible. Yes, you want to change what you're wearing? You're a kid. Be free. Do your
yep,
thing. If you want to play with this, play with it. But don't make any life-altering decisions until later, like, especially if you are M2F and you would like a full vaginoplasty one day.
Mhm.
It's easiest if you have the bottom growth from first puberty, because then you're not taking skin grafts from here, there, and
Yeah.
everywhere to get what you need. And while they are coming up with better ways to take from the stomach lining and stuff like that, we discourage the permanent altering for as much as possible. Like, even the kids that went through my programs that are now adults,
Mhm.
they they consciously have realized, I want to figure out who I am as a person
Yeah.
completely, or at least at this baseline adult level. Even though I want to transition, I'm okay just being on hormones and waiting for surgeries until like my early 20s. I'm
Yeah.
like, thank you for waiting, because it gave you time to figure out, like, even the identity piece, because non binary is still on the trans spectrum. And there are even non binary people that transition or don't transition, surgery, hormones. Like, there's no cut and dry, this is the path.
Right. That's I think that's really good advice. I I have someone in my family, I don't wanna say who they are because they're not ready to well, their parents aren't ready for me to broadcast this, but eventually I am gonna have a family member on my show who had a daughter who is now transgender boy, 12 years old, and is going through kind of figuring out what their identity is and stuff. So, and I guess my point when I was saying before, whenever I was in high school, there was no gay, but now kids are coming out as gay or lesbian and
Right.
now transgender at very much early ages. And I think it's fantastic that you know, that is much more supported, and it's I mean, obviously, it's
Well,
not everywhere, especially in the United States, because you go to some of these southern states or even the Midwest, you still can't do it, but
right.
my family is like everyone's 100% supportive of it, and it's just like, "Let's figure out what we can do to support you for this," and there's no oh no, that's not right, or no, that's not correct, or there's no disowning. Like my family is just like, yes, we will support you on whatever you want to be. So, but we don't want to do anything yet because you're still young, and we want to wait until you get a little older so you can make the right decisions.
See, and that's incredible, because even when I was in school, as just a queer, I mean, pre transition, I wasn't out yet, like male. I got death threats every day.
Oh,
Every day.
really?
And I was in high school from 2010 to 2015.
I mean, was it kids just because they were didn't understand it, or they're just kids are assholes and
Both.
just are mean? Okay,
Like, definitely both, because some of them understood it and knew the scrutiny, until one day someone actually laid a hand on me. And then they all found out that I already had 10 years of martial arts training under my belt.
I love that.
And then they realized I was very fighty. And after a few more, I mean, even dropping a kid in a gym class for calling another kid a faggot, I dropped him in a soccer field. And although I got sent to the office, the principals cheered me on.
I'm cheering you on now. That is amazing that you
I was
did
like,
that.
no, this ends right here. There's a substitute teacher, so my actual teacher won't witness this.
Yeah.
And although I did change schools the following year to end the daily death threats, the notes in my locker, the "we would love to kill you," alternate education was the way, where I, even after being paralyzed, after surgery gone a little bit sideways in grade 11, and working full time in grade 12, I still finished school a month early.
Wow. I think that is just such a great story for people to hear that you were able to stick up not just for yourself, but for other kids as well. So that's
Right?
amazing.
Well, and even when it comes to racism, being indigenous and then Afro-Italian on my dad's side, Even when someone is picking on a white homeless person on the street,
Mhm.
I still yell. I don't care because all people are people. We
Yeah.
all bleed red.
Yeah.
Oh, you like men? I also like men. They can be fun sometimes, even though they're assholes.
Yeah. Yes. Tell me about what your feelings are, how people can't get pronouns right. What is your feeling? And, and I know there's it's not, I don't think it's so new, but there's still people that just can't get pronouns right. And
Right.
where I work at, for my full-time job, we now have pronouns in our email signatures and on our, when you come up into a link, it's now your pronouns are in there so people aren't mistaken. Because the company I work for is they're fantastic because they have such a good DEI. I work very closely with a trans woman who I've become good friends with. You can be gay, you can be lesbian, you can be whatever you want at this company, and they are just really like supportive of it. But I feel like that even some people, and my mom, who's in her 70s now, is now finally understanding pronouns and understanding that, because I have another cousin who has married a trans man, and they're actually married. My mom would refer to him as his female name and male name together, and I said, "Mom, you got to stop doing that because that's not, you can't do that. He has a name now, and that's the name that you have to go by." What is your thoughts on that about pronouns? Or do you think people are getting more educated in it?
Well, it it's frustrating and it's laughable. And this is because everybody in the world has a name and
Mhm.
has pronouns.
Yes.
This isn't a trans issue, it's a respect issue.
Mhm.
See, if I respect you, I will call you by your name and pronouns.
Yes.
And and even when explaining this to my grandparents who were the final year born of baby boomers, um, it came down to referring to my grandmother as a man because of her mustache.
Hmm.
And finally, it hit. And it was, you're not Karen and he. I may be Reese, which is very neutral. But again, TwoSpirit, I am definitely feminine leaning and have been on hormones for upwards of 7 years.
Okay.
And yeah, like the full change has happened. I did what I did, but I still honor both my masculine and my feminine. And for me, like if you need the femininity out of me, Addison is my first middle name. And there are
Okay.
people that Addison me all the time also because Addison DeMarco is my pen name that I've written best-selling books under. And
Okay.
people question, well, can I call you Addie? I'm like, yeah, you can call me Addie. As long as you are not calling me by my dead name and you don't ask me about it, we're fine.
So that's a good point. So dead name, you don't want anybody asking you about the dead name. So that's a good lesson for people, right? And
Yeah.
then if people ask you a question like, and I'm saying, okay, so I'm trying to think of an example I could give you. So you meet somebody in a bar that is from, let me think of Alabama, a very southern U.S. state where they're not exposed to gay, lesbian, transgender people, and they ask, but it's a gay man. Let's say he's 35 and he comes up and he starts talking to you at the bar, and he asks you questions. If he asks you, "What surgeries did you get?" That's not really a proper question to ask somebody, right? Or am I
No,
wrong?
no,
Okay.
that is a very invasive question. And even going as far to be like, well, did you go on hormones? Like, no, it's not your right to know what anyone has done to their body or not done to their body. You only get those details if you are like pursuing and about to be in bed with.
Yes.
Then those conversations can happen, but they still need to occur in a respectful manner.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. And I think a lot of people don't realize that it's not a free for all to ask you a question, just because they're curious. I mean, like you said, go to Google and figure it out. It doesn't, they
right?
really are that curious. So,
Well, and even I was out for an energy drink at a bar while working on a manuscript this past weekend, and a woman starts chatting me up. And she goes, "Yes, I'm a lesbian, and I definitely think that you're a woman, but I could be wrong." And of course, like at this point in our conversation, she was hinting towards things. I wasn't interested, but it was a, if you would like to pursue this further, you need to know I am trans. And from there, she went, "I don't care what you've done. I'm still interested."
okay, that's cool.
Right? And frankly, that's where you need to be because it's the person and not the parts.
Yeah.
If we can look at same love with the openness of hearts not parts, then why are we not pursuing trans people in the same way?
Do you think there'll be a point, though, in the next, let's say, 15 years where people just will be accepting? And I'll just tell you what I think. I think as these older white conservative men that are straight start to slowly die out, and I hate to say it that way, but as they do, I think that the world will be accepting more of the LGBTQ plus community overall.
Well, and
And
even the old gay men, most of them are still so transphobic that the world would be better off if they keeled over.
yeah. And have you experienced that a lot with older gay men?
Yeah, I even in bigger cities like Calgary, which is 1.6 mil, and Vancouver, British Columbia, which is
Really?
Gan- Canada's like secondary gay capital. The old gay men are still crotchety and hateful. I'm like, is it just your caucasity? Is it the fact that you're old and white and gay and you forget that you still have the privilege of a white man in this world? Is that
Yeah.
why you're so unaccepting and hateful? Or is it just your refusal to accept in old age that, god damn, the world has changed a lot?
Yeah. That's, I mean, that's surprising that, well, I guess it's not surprising, but it is surprising in some ways that someone in our community wouldn't try to open their mind because of all the stuff that they possibly went through as being a gay man. I know it's much different. Trans and being gay are different, but they've had to have gone through some type of homophobic times in their life, and why they wouldn't like take that and say, well, there's transphobia too, so maybe I don't want to put that out in the world. I mean, that's what I would hope, but I guess that's not how they're thinking. So
Right? Well, and it's part of the divisiveness within the community globally right now. It has turned into each individualized "I'm special" label
mhm,
against each other, also within the age graphics against each other,
mhm.
instead of the "this is the queer community. We all bleed red, so why don't we just be kind to one another?" And sure, if you don't like someone, you don't have to befriend them, but you don't have to be a hateful bigot.
Yeah. Um, I just have a couple more questions. One is, there in the United States, I just did a news podcast yesterday, and I found that there are 617 anti-trans legislation laws that they are trying to do in the United States in 2024. And I think 64 of them, I think, is I'd have to go back and look at my research, but I believe 64 of them are federally
Mhm.
anti-trans laws that they're trying to pass in the United States. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, whenever I seen the number, just I mean that they're spending so much time on anti-trans laws when there are homeless people and mentally ill people, and there's so many other problems in this world, but that's what they're focusing on. I think that was just so shocking to me more than anything else in the news that I was reading for the LGBTQ plus community, that there's that many anti-trans laws. What is your thoughts on that, and how do you think we get around that as a community?
Honestly, you have to get back to separating church and state.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the all people deserve human rights. And as long as they're not harming anyone, why do we care? I
Yeah.
don't care that you love men. Again, I'm pansexual, equal opportunity as long as all parties are consenting.
Yeah.
But I don't get why we're so hell-bent, and I don't get why people who claim to paraphrase a book are living in ways that don't follow any of said book's guidelines.
Yeah. And then my last question for you is, um, how's your dating life? Are you dating now? And whenever you meet somebody, are you telling them about your journey and about who you are pretty much right away? So it sounds like you met a lesbian yesterday. She seemed interested. I don't know if you meant she was interested as a friend or more, but what is your dating life like?
Well, I am thankfully separated from a very long relationship. Um,
Okay.
2.5 years of freedom.
Okay.
But I guess I kind of have a partner on the side that
Okay.
I mean, until I moved away, we were close. And now I see them when they are in the city for conferences. But I date openly when the opportunities are there.
Okay.
And I do speak openly about my transition when someone states genuine interest in getting to know me. Because it's okay, like, here's what it is. We can talk about in depth at later dates and get
Yeah.
into that. But there's no hiding. I mean, I've been what you would consider post-op for already 5 years.
Okay. Great.
Like, this is who I am, take it or leave it. If you don't like it, leave it the way you found it.
Now, is there, just to kind of close out the interview, if there was one thing that you wanted people to know or to be educated on, what would that be? What would you want people to say, this is how you treat a trans person, or this is my word of advice for them? What would you say?
Really, I would say treat trans people like any other person in your life. What they're just people trying to match their inner experience of themselves
Hmm.
with the exterior, like everybody else in the world, believe it or not. And a word of advice would be in as much protest as it takes, just be your authentic self and do no harm.
That's awesome. Well, I really enjoyed having you on. I think that you gave some really great tips and education to anyone that, has had questions, and maybe they will think about it a little bit more if they didn't know the answers, and they'll take this interview and say, okay, well, whenever I do meet a trans person, or and maybe they should go out and try to meet a trans person to help make them to educate themselves with also. So and I know that I live in Boston, which is a very liberal, open, gay, trans city. So I am in a bubble in a lot of ways. But, if you're in the South and living in the United States, and I have actually listeners from all over the world, if you're in a city that's small or something, take a trip and meet somebody in the gay community. And that's not just a gay man or just a lesbian if you're a lesbian. Meet other people that are part of the community, and reach out
It
to them and
it
learn.
exactly. Talk to people not for the sake of sleeping with them, but just
Yes.
sharing that humanity piece of, "Hi, I'm gonna talk to you because you're sitting here and you look like you'd like to have just a conversation with
Hmm.
no loaded intent behind it."
Yeah. Great advice. I really enjoyed having you on. Thank you so much. Reese, again, is Trauma to Bliss, is what her career is. Anything you'd want to tell people to go to learn more about you, Reese?
Well, you can find me anywhere on social media under the tag of Trauma to Bliss. And ultimately, even if you want to reach out because you just need an ear, you don't have to talk to me because you need hours of my time. Just if you need a queer adult or friend to listen to what's going on in your life, don't hesitate to reach out to me or anyone else that you feel safe talking to about your experiences.
That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. You are a great guest. I appreciate you being on. And please be sure to subscribe to my podcast, and I will talk to you next week. Thanks again, Reese.